Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. About the author. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an English poet, philosopher, and literary critic who played a pivotal role in the Romantic movement. Coleridge is known for his innovative contributions to poetry, philosophy, and literary theory. Coleridge formed a close friendship and literary partnership with William Wordsworth, which led to their collaboration on the groundbreaking collection Lyrical Ballads, 1798. Coleridge's contributions to the collection include some of his most famous poems, such as The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Frost at Midnight. Coleridge's major poetic works include Kubla Khan, Christabel, and Dejection, an ode. He also wrote important philosophical and critical works, such as Biographia Literaria, 1817, which blends autobiography with literary criticism and philosophy. Coleridge's influence on the Romantic movement and English literature is profound. His theories on imagination and poetic creation have had a lasting impact on literary criticism and aesthetics. His poetry is known for its vivid imagery, emotional depth, and exploration of supernatural and philosophical themes. Coleridge's collaboration with Wordsworth and his critical works helped define the Romantic movement and set the stage for subsequent developments in literature. Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a complex and influential figure in English literature and philosophy. His works continue to be studied and appreciated for their contributions to Romanticism and literary theory. Summary of the book. Biographia Literaria. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Biographia Literaria is a complex and multifaceted work that combines autobiography, literary criticism, and philosophical reflection. The book is divided into 2 volumes, each with its distinct focus and thematic content. Volume 1 begins with Coleridge's account of his early life, including his education and influences. This autobiographical section is often seen as valuable for the personal insights it provides into Coleridge's intellectual development. Critics appreciate the connections between Coleridge's experiences and his later literary and philosophical ideas. Coleridge discusses his interest in German philosophy, particularly the works of Kant and Schelling. This influence is significant in shaping his thoughts on imagination and creativity. Critics analyze how his philosophical views impact his literary theories. Coleridge introduces the concept of primary and secondary imagination, which has become central to understanding his aesthetic philosophy. Critics praise these ideas as foundational for the study of Romantic literature and literary theory. Coleridge critiques the poetic practices of his time, focusing on the use of poetic diction and language. His views on authenticity and naturalness in poetry provide insight into the literary debates of the early 19th century. Volume 2 delves further into philosophical discussions, including the nature of knowledge and perception. Critics value Coleridge's intellectual depth and the impact of his philosophical musings on his literary theories. One of the key aspects of Volume 2 is Coleridge's critique of William Wordsworth's poetry, particularly their differing views on poetic language. Critics debate Coleridge's arguments, finding them thoughtful but sometimes harsh. Coleridge's discussions on literary principles, such as unity and coherence, offer significant contributions to literary theory. Critics appreciate his analytical approach and nuanced perspectives. Biographia Literaria is known for its nonlinear narrative and digressions, which can be challenging for readers to follow. Critics have noted that the book's structure can be seen as lacking coherence, making it difficult to grasp Coleridge's arguments. Coleridge's ideas can sometimes be ambiguous or open to different interpretations, leading to differing views among scholars. Critics find his philosophical discussions particularly complex and nuanced. Despite its challenges, Biographia Literaria has had a profound impact on literary theory and criticism, particularly in the context of Romantic literature. Coleridge's ideas on imagination, poetic diction, and literary criticism continue to influence scholars and poets. In conclusion, Biographia Literaria is a complex and influential work that blends autobiography, literary criticism, and philosophy. While its nonlinear structure and ambiguity present challenges, its contributions to literary theory and philosophy have made it a seminal text in English literature. Critical analysis of the book, Biographia Literaria. Biographia Literaria is an autobiographical literary work by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, published in 1817. The book is often considered a foundational text in English literary criticism and has been subject to extensive critical analysis. Coleridge's work is a blend of autobiography, literary criticism, and philosophy. Critics often note that the book reveals his thoughts on various poets, including his contemporaries such as Wordsworth and himself. It provides insight into Coleridge's own poetic development and creative process. The work is steeped in Coleridge's philosophical musings, particularly his ideas on imagination and creativity. He differentiates between primary and secondary imagination, which has been influential in the study of literature and poetry. Critical analyses often explore how his philosophical views influenced his poetry and other writings. Coleridge discusses his relationship and disagreements with Wordsworth, particularly concerning the nature of poetry and poetic language. Critics examine this dynamic to understand the broader context of Romantic literary theory and practice. Coleridge's Biographia Literaria contains his perspectives on literary standards and the value of poetic craftsmanship. Critics analyze his critique of the poetic practices of his time and his influence on future literary theories. The book's structure can be challenging for readers due to its nonlinear narrative and digressions into various topics. Critics often debate the coherence and organization of the text, as well as Coleridge's approach to writing. The impact of Biographia Literaria on literary criticism has been profound. Critics study the work to understand Coleridge's contributions to literary theory and his lasting influence on subsequent generations of poets and critics. The structure and tone of Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge are distinctive and contribute to the unique nature of the work. Biographia Literaria is known for its nonlinear structure, with Coleridge often digressing from his primary topic into various other subjects. The narrative does not follow a strict chronological order but instead shifts between different topics and time periods, which can make the book challenging to follow. The book is a blend of autobiography, literary criticism, and philosophy. This combination of genres creates a multifaceted work that provides insights into Coleridge's personal experiences, literary theories, and philosophical views. The book is divided into 2 volumes, each with its focus. Volume 1 primarily deal with Coleridge's autobiography and early life, while Volume 2 delves more into literary criticism and philosophical discourse. Throughout the book, Coleridge provides detailed analysis and critique of various poets, literary works, and philosophical ideas. His discussions are often deep and complex, requiring careful attention from the reader. The tone of Biographia Literaria is reflective and intellectual, as Coleridge explores his thoughts on literature, philosophy, and his personal experiences. His writing often demonstrates a deep engagement with complex ideas and theories. Coleridge's enthusiasm for literature and philosophy is evident throughout the book. He passionately discusses his views on poetry, imagination, and other topics. The book features a critical and analytical tone, particularly in Volume 2, where Coleridge examines the works of other poets, including Wordsworth. His critiques are thoughtful and nuanced, reflecting his strong opinions and intellectual rigor. Coleridge's writing often takes on a personal and conversational tone, especially when discussing his own experiences and reflections. This approach makes the book more approachable and engaging for readers. The tone becomes more philosophical and theoretical when Coleridge delves into topics such as imagination, reason, and understanding. His exploration of these ideas demonstrates his deep interest in philosophical questions and their relevance to literature. Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge has received a range of critical reactions over the years. As one of the foundational texts in English literary criticism, the book has been both praised and critiqued for its complexity and its contributions to literary theory and philosophy. Coleridge's ideas on imagination, poetic language, and literary criticism have been highly influential in the study of literature and poetry. Critics often praise the book for its profound impact on the development of literary theory, particularly in the context of the Romantic movement. Coleridge's philosophical insights and nuanced approach to literary criticism are often lauded for their depth and sophistication. The book offers a complex and rich exploration of topics such as reason, imagination, and the nature of artistic creation. Coleridge's distinctions between primary and secondary imagination and his discussions of poetic language have been particularly well received. These concepts have become central to understanding Romantic aesthetics and continue to influence literary theory today. The autobiographical elements of the book provide valuable insights into Coleridge's life and the development of his literary and philosophical ideas. Critics appreciate the personal reflections and connections between Coleridge's experiences and his intellectual pursuits. Some critics find the book's nonlinear structure and digressive style challenging to follow, leading to a perceived lack of coherence in the narrative. The book's complexity can make it difficult for readers to grasp Coleridge's arguments and ideas. Coleridge's philosophical discussions can sometimes be ambiguous or vague, leading to different interpretations of his ideas. Critics may find this lack of clarity frustrating, as it can obscure Coleridge's intended meaning. Coleridge's critique of Wordsworth and other poets has been the subject of debate among scholars. While some appreciate his thoughtful analysis, others find his critiques to be overly harsh or lacking in fairness. Critics have pointed out inconsistencies in Coleridge's arguments and views, particularly in his discussions of poetic language and style. These inconsistencies can make it challenging to understand his overall perspective on literature. Overall, Biographia Literaria is a rich and complex work that offers valuable insights into Coleridge's mind, the Romantic literary movement, and the broader field of literary criticism. Critics appreciate the depth of thought and the intricate connections between Coleridge's personal experiences, philosophical ideas, and literary critiques in this work. Biographia Literaria has been celebrated for its intellectual depth and contributions to literary theory, but it has also faced criticism for its complexity and ambiguity. Despite these critiques, the book remains an essential text in English literature and literary criticism. Below is a detailed critical analysis of each chapter. Volume 1. 1. Chapter 1. Coleridge recounts his early life, education, and influences. Critics appreciate the personal insight this chapter offers into Coleridge's formative years, but it can be seen as somewhat tangential to the overall focus of the book. 2. Chapter 2. Coleridge discusses his academic experiences and his exposure to new ideas. This chapter provides insight into Coleridge's intellectual development and the shaping of his poetic and philosophical ideas. 3. Chapter 3. He reflects on his early philosophical influences, particularly Kant and other German philosophers. Critics find this chapter important in understanding Coleridge's later philosophical views. 4. Chapter 4. Coleridge explores his interest in metaphysics and how it influences his literary and philosophical perspectives. This chapter highlights the transition in his thinking. 5. Chapter 5. He recounts his experiences at Cambridge and his engagement with various intellectual circles. Critics appreciate the personal anecdotes and their connection to Coleridge's intellectual journey. 6. Chapter 6. Coleridge discusses his trip to the continent and his exposure to German philosophy and literature. Critics find this chapter crucial in understanding Coleridge's evolving intellectual landscape. 7. Chapter 7. He describes his return to England and his shift in perspective on politics and society. Critics value his reflections on his transformation during this period. 8. Chapter 8. Coleridge recounts his literary collaborations and relationships, including with Wordsworth. This chapter provides insight into the dynamics of the Romantic movement. 9. Chapter 9. He explores his shift from politics to poetry and his focus on spiritual and philosophical themes. Critics find this chapter pivotal in understanding Coleridge's intellectual transition. 10. Chapter 10. Coleridge delves into his poetic and philosophical ideas. Critics appreciate the depth of his reflections in this chapter. 11. Chapter 11. He discusses his experiences as a lecturer and his thoughts on religion and spirituality. Critics find this chapter insightful and reflective. 12. Chapter 12. Coleridge examines his literary relationships, particularly his collaborations with Wordsworth. Critics note the importance of this chapter in understanding the relationship between the two poets. 13. Chapter 13. Coleridge introduces his theory of imagination and its central role in poetry and art. Critics appreciate his distinction between primary and secondary imagination. 14. Chapter 14. This chapter further discusses Coleridge's theory of imagination, emphasizing the distinction between primary and secondary imagination. Critics find this chapter foundational to his overall aesthetic philosophy. Volume 2. 15. Chapter 15. Coleridge critiques Wordsworth's approach to poetry, especially his use of language. Critics value this chapter for its nuanced analysis of poetic language. 16. Chapter 16. He explores the relationship between poetry and philosophy. Critics find his reflections on these disciplines' interplay insightful. 17. Chapter 17. Coleridge critiques Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads. Critics appreciate this chapter for its detailed examination of poetic language and style. 18. Chapter 18. He discusses poetic meter and rhythm. Critics appreciate his insights into the musicality of poetry. 19. Chapter 19. Coleridge analyzes specific poems by Wordsworth. Critics value his close readings and detailed critiques. 20. Chapter 20. He examines the impact of language on poetic expression. Critics find his exploration of linguistic theories interesting. 21. Chapter 21. Coleridge discusses the creative process and poetic genius. Critics appreciate his reflections on inspiration and the nature of creation. 22. Chapter 22. He critiques contemporary poets and their approaches to language. Critics find his analysis of poetic trends valuable. 23. Chapter 23. Coleridge explores his philosophy of life and the interconnectedness of intellectual pursuits. Critics find this chapter profound. 24. Chapter 24. The concluding chapter reflects on the book's overall themes and ideas. Critics appreciate Coleridge's synthesis of philosophy, literature, and personal experience. In conclusion, Biographia Literaria is a rich and multifaceted work that offers deep insights into Coleridge's intellectual journey, literary criticism, and philosophical views. The book's structure is somewhat disjointed, which can make it challenging to follow, but its depth and influence have made it an essential text in English literature and literary theory. Critics continue to appreciate its contributions to understanding Romantic aesthetics and the role of imagination in poetry. Wordsworth and poetic diction of the book. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's discussions on William Wordsworth and poetic diction in Biographia Literaria are some of the most important and closely analyzed aspects of the book. Coleridge's critique of Wordsworth's poetic diction, in particular, is a key focus of his examination of contemporary poetry. Coleridge's relationship with Wordsworth. Coleridge and Wordsworth had a close professional and personal relationship during the early years of the Romantic movement. They collaborated on the seminal work Lyrical Ballads, 1798, which is often seen as a cornerstone of the Romantic movement. Despite their collaboration, Coleridge and Wordsworth had significant differences in their views on poetry and poetic language. These differences are explored in detail in Biographia Literaria. Coleridge's critique of Wordsworth's poetic diction. Wordsworth advocated for the use of common language in poetry, believing that poetry should use the language of ordinary people in everyday speech. While Coleridge acknowledged the merit in Wordsworth's approach to poetic language, he also raised concerns about Wordsworth's extreme emphasis on common language. He argued that poetry should strike a balance between ordinary language and poetic elevation. Coleridge questioned whether the use of common language would always achieve the desired poetic effect. He believed that the language of poetry should be heightened and expressive to evoke emotion and imagination. Coleridge emphasized that poetic diction should serve the purpose of the poem, including creating vivid imagery and emotional resonance. He argued that a poet's choice of words and language should be deliberate and purposeful. Coleridge's views on poetic diction. Coleridge believed that imagination played a crucial role in poetic diction. He saw poetry as a creative process that required a blending of the real and the ideal. Coleridge agreed with Wordsworth on the avoidance of overly artificial or archaic language in poetry, but he also believed that poetic language should not be limited to just everyday speech. Coleridge advocated for a nuanced and balanced approach to poetic diction, where the poet uses language that is both accessible and elevated to suit the poem's theme and tone. Overall, Coleridge's critique of Wordsworth's poetic diction is one of the key areas of his discussion in Biographia Literaria. While he acknowledged the value of Wordsworth's approach, he argued for a more balanced and thoughtful use of language in poetry. Coleridge's views on poetic diction have had a lasting impact on literary theory and continue to be studied and debated by scholars today. Question and answers. Q1. What does Chapter 14 of Biographia Literaria deal with? Ans. Chapter 14 of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Biographia Literaria is one of the most famous and significant chapters in the book. It is known for its exploration of the nature of poetry and the concept of imagination. Coleridge discusses his definition of poetry as the expression of the highest form of imaginative thought. He argues that poetry should combine beauty with truth, resulting in an emotional and intellectual impact on the reader. Coleridge introduces his distinction between primary and secondary imagination, two concepts that have become central to understanding his aesthetic philosophy. Primary imagination is the innate, creative power of the human mind that shapes perception and reality. It is the basic force of creation and creativity. Secondary imagination is a conscious, reflective process that builds upon primary imagination to transform and reconfigure existing perceptions and experiences. Coleridge distinguishes between fancy and imagination, with fancy being a more mechanical and superficial form of creativity. He argues that imagination is a deeper, more transformative process that involves the synthesis of different elements to create something new and original. Coleridge emphasizes the importance of unity and harmony in poetry, arguing that the true poet integrates diverse elements into a cohesive whole. This integration is achieved through the poet's imaginative vision and skill. Chapter 14 is considered one of the most influential sections of Biographia Literaria due to its exploration of imagination and its impact on poetry. Coleridge's distinction between primary and secondary imagination has had a lasting influence on literary theory and aesthetics. Coleridge's philosophical insights into the nature of poetry and the role of imagination are central to understanding his broader aesthetic philosophy. His ideas on the creative process and the relationship between imagination and fancy have been widely studied and debated. Chapter 14 provides a foundation for the principles of Romantic aesthetics, including the emphasis on imagination and the transformative power of poetry. Coleridge's views on the poet's role in creating beauty and truth continue to be relevant to discussions of poetry and art. Overall, Chapter 14 of Biographia Literaria is a key chapter in the book, offering deep insights into Coleridge's views on poetry and imagination. It remains a seminal text in literary theory and aesthetics. Q. 2. What is the theory of imagination in Biographia Literaria? Coleridge. Ans. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's theory of imagination, as presented in Biographia Literaria, is one of the most significant contributions to the book and to literary theory as a whole. Coleridge distinguishes between different types of imagination and explores their roles in the creative process and in perception. Primary imagination. Coleridge describes primary imagination as the fundamental and innate creative power of the human mind. It is present in everyone and is responsible for shaping perception and reality. This form of imagination is the living force that enables individuals to perceive and understand the world around them. Primary imagination operates unconsciously and continuously, serving as the basis for conscious thought and creativity. It is responsible for transforming sensory input into coherent experiences and perceptions. Coleridge views primary imagination as the creative force behind all artistic and intellectual endeavors. It is the source of originality and novelty in art and thought. Secondary imagination. Secondary imagination is a conscious and reflective process that builds upon primary imagination. It involves the mind actively transforming and reconfiguring perceptions and experiences into new forms. Coleridge sees secondary imagination as a process of creative synthesis, where the mind combines and rearranges different elements to produce something new and original. This form of imagination allows poets and artists to create works that transcend ordinary perception and evoke emotion and meaning. Secondary imagination is responsible for achieving unity and harmony in art by integrating diverse elements into a cohesive whole. This process results in a work of art that reflects the artist's imaginative vision and creativity. Coleridge distinguishes fancy from imagination, describing it as a more mechanical and superficial form of creativity. Fancy is characterized by the ability to associate and combine existing ideas and images, but it lacks the depth and transformative power of imagination. Coleridge's theory of imagination has had a profound impact on literary theory and aesthetics, particularly in the context of Romantic literature. His distinctions between primary and secondary imagination have become foundational concepts in the study of literature and art. The theory emphasizes the transformative and unifying power of imagination in creating art that resonates with both emotion and intellect. In summary, Coleridge's theory of imagination in Biographia Literaria highlights the central role of imagination in perception, creativity, and artistic expression. His ideas have had a lasting influence on literary theory and continue to be studied and debated by scholars. Q3. What is the main point of Chapter 17 in Biographia Literaria? Ans. Chapter 17 of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Biographia Literaria is one of the most significant and often cited chapters in the book. In this chapter, Coleridge presents a critical analysis of William Wordsworth's preface to Lyrical Ballads, 1800, and the poet's theories about poetry and poetic language. Coleridge critiques Wordsworth's approach to poetry, particularly his emphasis on using the language of ordinary people and everyday life in poetic works. Coleridge disagrees with Wordsworth's assertion that the language of poetry should be a selection of the real language spoken by people. Coleridge argues that poetic language should be more complex and nuanced than ordinary speech, as it needs to evoke imagination and emotion in the reader. He contends that poetry should strive for beauty and expression that goes beyond everyday language. Coleridge emphasizes the role of imagination in transforming ordinary experiences into poetic art. He believes that imagination elevates poetry and distinguishes it from other forms of writing. Coleridge discusses the distinction between poetry and prose, emphasizing the role of meter and rhythm in poetry. He challenges Wordsworth's claim that there is little difference between poetry and prose in terms of language. Coleridge believes that poetry's language should have an expressive power that resonates with the reader, and that this power goes beyond the use of ordinary language. While Coleridge critiques Wordsworth's theories, he also acknowledges the value of Wordsworth's poetic genius and his contributions to literature. He seeks to reconcile their differing views by finding a balance between Wordsworth's emphasis on ordinary language and his own belief in the transformative power of imagination. Chapter 17 is a key part of Biographia Literaria because it illustrates Coleridge's critical perspective on Wordsworth's theories of poetry and poetic language. It also highlights his broader views on the role of imagination and the expressive nature of poetry. Critics and scholars continue to study this chapter for its insights into the relationship between the two poets and their differing approaches to poetic theory.